They danced until their limbs fell off, literally. In the fields where the rye swayed like possessed souls in the wind, they consumed the bread that would consume them. Fingers blackened and dropped away. Feet rotted while their owners still stood upon them. And through cracked and bleeding lips, they screamed of hellfire scorching them from within, invisible flames that no water could quench. This was St. Anthony's fire, ergotism, a horror that stalked Europe for a millennium, leaving mutilation and madness in its wake. It begins innocuously enough. Tiny purple-black spurs replacing rye kernels, hardly noticeable to the untrained eye. Claviceps purpurea, the ergot fungus, thriving in damp conditions, contaminating grain with potent alkaloids that would centuries later birth LSD. But to medieval peasants, this was no hallucinogenic experiment. It was a death sentence delivered through their daily bread. The connection between ergot and human suffering represents perhaps the longest-running uncontrolled experiment in toxicology ever conducted, notes medical historian Mary Matossian. Poisoning that continued unchecked and largely unidentified for nearly 1,000 years. When the rains came too heavy and lingered too long, when springs were cool and summers humid, the fungus proliferated. The cosmic dance of climate and agriculture determined who would suffer and who would be spared. In the hierarchy of grains, wheat went to nobility and clergy, while rye, the stubborn crop that grows in poor soil and harsh conditions, was the peasant's portion. And so it was that this affliction scorched primarily through the lowest ranks of society. In fields kissed by mist, the violet-black sclerotia waited like tiny bombs of misery. Imagine consuming poison with every bite of what sustains you. The alkaloids of ergot are vasoconstrictors. They strangle blood vessels, particularly in the extremities. First comes the sensation of ants crawling beneath the skin, then burning pain so intense sufferers would plunge their limbs into snow or icy streams, desperately seeking relief. The medieval chronicler Sigebert of Gembloux wrote of the epidemic of 1089, a pestilent year, especially in the western parts of Lorraine, where many were struck with holy fire, their limbs turning as black as coal, putrefied and fell off before death released them from their torments. Their flesh turned gangrenous, blackened like overripe fruit left too long in summer sun. The stench of necrotic tissue followed them, announcing their affliction before their moans could. When the fire had finished its work, those still living found themselves with stumps where hands and feet once were, if they survived at all. But the physical torment was only half the curse. They called it St. Vitus's dance, this wild, uncontrollable movement of the afflicted. Under the influence of ergot's alkaloids, chemically related to the psychedelic compound LSD, victims experienced hallucinations so vivid they believed themselves possessed. Some saw demons, others were convinced they conversed with saints. Many felt insects burrowing under their skin or believed their bodies were shrinking or expanding. The dancing manias of the Middle Ages reveal an unexplored intersection of environmental toxicology, psychology, and religious fervor, argues historian William McNeill. What appears as mass hysteria had a biochemical catalyst that transformed entire communities into unwitting participants in their own destruction. In 1374, thousands of people along the Rhine River began to dance feverishly. They continued for days without rest, their movements frenzied and without rhythm until they collapsed from exhaustion. Some ruptured blood vessels, others suffered broken bones. Many danced themselves to death, their bodies betraying them in this macabre ballet. The accounts are filled with lyrical horror. They danced in rings, holding hands, leaping higher and higher, shrieking strange words no man could understand. Their eyes rolled back as if seeing visions beyond this world. Village to village, The contagion of movement spread like embers caught by wind. The authorities believed it demonic possession. The church prescribed exorcism. All the while, the true culprit waited silently in their bread boxes and grain stores. In the years when famine threatened, even moldy grain would find its way to the mill. Hunger makes for poor quality control. The contaminated flour produced bread with flecks of purple, yet when one is starving, such details seem insignificant. During the worst outbreaks, entire villages succumbed. The chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall described the 1193 outbreak in England. In fields and roads and other places, the suffering fell down, their limbs eaten away by the holy fire. Their flesh was black as coal. They implored the aid of passers-by to put them out of their misery. The cruel irony was that in times of widespread ergotism, communities often attributed their suffering to divine punishment, organizing religious processions that brought the hungry together to share what little bread remained, spreading the poison further. Monasteries established hospitals specifically for these victims, the most famous being those run by the Hospital Brothers of St. Anthony, founded in 1095. With their distinctive T-shaped cross and accompanying pig, allowed to roam freely through towns, fattening themselves for eventual slaughter to feed the sick, the Antonines became synonymous with the disease they treated. Perhaps their greatest treatment was simply providing uncontaminated food. The monks of St. Anthony didn't realize why their patients improved under their care, notes historian Stephen Bednarski. By removing the poisoned bread from their diet and offering clean nutrition, they were inadvertently providing the only effective treatment available. When a teenage girl in Salem Village began to contort herself into impossible positions in 1692, when her friends joined her in fits of screaming and bizarre behavior, the community saw witchcraft. Modern scholars see ergotism. The weather conditions preceding the Salem witch trials were precisely those that favor ergot infestation, explains Linda Caparael, whose groundbreaking research linked the symptoms described in Salem court records to ergot poisoning. The accusing girls lived in the western section of Salem Village, where the low-lying damp meadows would have been perfect for ergot growth. Their visions of specters, their sensations of being pinched and pricked, their contortions, all consistent with ergot alkaloid effects. 20 people would die before the madness subsided, executed for crimes they could not have committed, victims of grain that drove their accusers to temporary insanity. Across Europe, how many women met flames at the stake because rye brought hallucinations to their communities? How many confessed to witchcraft under the influence of ergot's mind-altering chemistry? It is a dark mathematics we can only estimate. What makes ergot so uniquely devastating is its complex cocktail of compounds. It produces ergotamine, a powerful vasoconstrictor still used in controlled doses to treat migraines. It creates ergometrine, used in obstetrics to prevent postpartum hemorrhage, and it harbors ergine and ergonovine, precursors to lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. The ergot alkaloids represent one of nature's most fascinating chemical achievements, observes Albert Hofmann, the chemist who first synthesized LSD from ergot derivatives. The same compounds that brought unspeakable suffering throughout history have, when properly understood and controlled, become valuable medicines. The gangrenous form of ergotism comes primarily from ergotamine and ergotoxin, while the convulsive hallucinatory form stems from ergin and related compounds. Whether victims burned from within or danced with demons depended on the specific ergot strain that colonized their grain. In a cruel twist, pregnant women exposed to ergot often miscarried due to the uterine contracting properties of its alkaloids. Indeed, ergot was once known as Mutterkorn, in German, mother grain, for its ability to induce labor. Midwives kept small, carefully measured amounts for difficult deliveries, walking a dangerous line between medicine and poison. Over time, ergotism retreated slowly from Europe. Better agricultural practices, greater understanding of crop diseases, and changing dietary habits gradually reduced outbreaks. The last major European epidemic occurred in 1951 in Pont-Saint-Esprit, France, where several people died and hundreds were affected after consuming contaminated bread from a local bakery. Survivors described hallucinations of terrifying beasts, sensations of being devoured by fire, and the conviction that their bodies were transforming. One man believed he was a tram and ran through the streets making clanging noises. Another thought his head had detached from his body. A woman was convinced that someone had replaced her brain with molten lead. The French writer Albert Camus visited the town during the outbreak, later writing, "It was as if the Middle Ages had returned to claim this modern village, a medieval curse transplanted into a world of electricity and automobiles." Today, ergotism has largely vanished from developed nations, where modern milling techniques and agricultural controls prevent contaminated grain from reaching consumers. But in developing regions with limited food testing infrastructure, the ancient fire still occasionally burns. The echoes of St. Anthony's fire resonate beyond medicine into culture itself. Some art historians suggest that the grotesque figures in Hieronymus Bosch's paintings were inspired by the ergot-affected individuals the artist would have encountered. The Black Madonna statues found throughout Europe, with their distinctively dark complexion, may represent the Virgin Mary as healer of the holy fire that turned skin black. Even our language carries ergot's imprint. The term ergot derives from the Old French ergot, meaning cock's spur, describing the fungus's appearance. This gave us argot for specialized jargon, originally the secret language of thieves, communication as hidden and specialized as the fungus itself. We still carry the cultural memory of ergotism in our folklore, art, and language, suggests cultural historian Patrick Herman. The dancing plagues, the witch hunts, the imagery of fire consuming victims from within. These narratives shaped European consciousness in ways we're only beginning to understand. Perhaps most significantly, the study of ergot alkaloids revolutionized neuroscience, offering the first window into the serotonergic system of the brain. The discovery that LSD's effects came from its interaction with serotonin receptors opened new avenues for understanding consciousness itself. The fire that once burned through medieval villages now illuminates the laboratories of neurochemistry. Some historians have suggested that ergotism shaped more than individual lives. It influenced the course of history itself. Mary Metossian controversially proposed that ergot poisoning contributed to the fertility decline that preceded the French Revolution, as contaminated grain caused spontaneous abortions and reduced birth rates in the years of poor harvests leading to 1789. Others point to the Russian Revolution, noting that the years before 1917 saw weather conditions favorable to ergot growth in the rye-dependent regions of the Russian Empire. Did the hallucinatory effects of ergot poisoning intensify revolutionary fervor? Did the physical suffering of ergotism add fuel to political discontent? We can only speculate. The rye fields still wave in the wind, still whisper their ancient secrets. Modern farmers know what to look for now, the telltale purple-black protrusions that signal danger. But when fog rolls across the fields in the grey dawn, one might still imagine the dancing ghosts of centuries past, their phantom limbs reaching toward heaven in supplication, seeking relief from the fire that once consumed them from within.